People of African Descent New Thought Group proudly present Celebrating Our Soul, Consciously Creating Change. Our partner, New Thought Media Network, is offering this interview series to highlight some of the luminaries who will present at this amazing event. For more information, go to padntg.com. Stay tuned for a wonderful interview. Peace and blessings.
Hi, everyone. Reverend Elzia Sekou here, Senior Minister at CSL Denver. And we're here again with another interview for Celebrating Our Soul coming up August 1st through the 4th in Unity Village. And I have the pleasure of being with Meico Whitlock, a spiritual technologist who's going to be doing a master class on self-care for spiritual seekers. And it promises to be a very involved and enlightening class. And so I'm going to flip it over to him because he's going to describe himself better than I can, because that's just what it is. And so we're going to get to that. And then we're going to get into this interview to talk about what you need to be involved in this conference coming up on August 1st through the 4th. Meico, turn it over to you, sir. How are you today?
I'm great and happy to be here. I appreciate you making time for the conversation.
Yes, yes. So tell us a little bit about, I know you got a lot of stuff going on. I checked that out, and you got a bunch of stuff. So I'll let you kind of give everyone an idea of all the different things you're involved in, and then we'll just dive into the content that you're going to be providing.
Absolutely. So I am a workplace well-being strategist and trainer. So I work with mission-driven teams and organizations on creating healthy workplace cultures, and that includes working with spiritual seekers and faith communities on creating healthy cultures so that we can ultimately do our greatest work and do that even better so that we can go about the work that we're doing in terms of changing the world. I believe that we all have a mission that we're called to, and so my work is supporting the folks that are on that mission to do that in a conscious way, to do it even better. And I come to this work having worked most of my professional career in nonprofit and government work, and made a decision that I wanted to expand how I was being of service. And now I do the work that I'm doing right now full time, working with organizations all across the world, dealing with a range of issues around workplace well-being, from mindful and intentional leadership in the workplace to work-life balance, addressing issues related to technology distraction and overwhelm, and really anything that involves helping people who are mission-driven to do great work even better, but without sacrificing themselves in the process.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot, and it is a lot that is needed because having worked in a corporate environment as a consultant and watching all of the different things go back and forth, it becomes very apparent that if you don't take time for yourself, you will be burnt out. And when we look at social justice and social action and the way we are asking our leaders and our communities to be involved, there has to be a moment where you get some downtime. And in addition to that, there has to be a way for you to understand the boundaries and where things start and where things stop and how to say no. And so I appreciate the work that you're doing, because I probably could have used you a few years back to give me a little help when I was burning, but I'm glad you're providing this service now. So in terms of, tell us a little bit about, I know you're going to be doing this self-care. How do you see self-care working, or the benefits of it that you're going to be presenting to the group, or in an environment where we're looking at social justice and social action?
Absolutely. Well, one way I think about this is that we are very good, particularly those of us that are mission driven, and particularly those of us that are spiritual seekers. We are very good at doing what I describe as the outer work, right? So we got a calendar full of meetings, and we're good at the emails and managing the projects. On the spiritual side, we're taking the class, we're going to this conference, we're going to this service, we're volunteering for this program and we're helping this group. So we're really good at doing the outer work. But what I find a lot of times is that we're not so good at prioritizing the inner work. We're good at telling other people about it. We're good at perhaps teaching other people about it. We're good at sort of giving other people the roadmap, but we're not so good always at practicing what we preach. And so what we experience is, we experience short-term success and short-term wins, but we experience like what you talked about earlier, which is so common, that after a while you find yourself disconnected from the original vision for why you were doing what you were doing, right? You find yourself burned out. You find yourself running short on patience. You find yourself maybe bumping up against a health crisis, and you find yourself maybe in a situation where you have to have a life-altering moment to sort of wake you up, right? The universe sort of knocks you upside the head and sort of reminds you why you're here, and sort of helps you to sort of get back in place. And so this particular topic is important because we have to understand that this is an ongoing practice, the way that I describe it. It's not a one-time switch. You don't take one class, you don't read one book, you don't do one particular practice, and then it's all done. Ongoing practice, because we're continuously evolving, and the seasons of our life are continuing to change. And what we need in a particular season of life and work continues to change. So we have to be about the business of making space for doing this inner work in an intentional way, so that we're pouring from the inside out as opposed to the reverse. If we do it from the reverse, what happens is we ultimately run dry. Our cup runs dry, and then we have nothing else to give, right?
Right. Yeah, and of course you brought up the proverbial, do as I say, not as I do, metaphor for a lot of spiritual leaders, because it, and I think the other part of that is that enough in that, if you're passionate about something, you can easily overlook all of the signs and symbols and warnings and everything. And when you look at where spiritual leaders and teachers and social activists are, it's a passionate field that they're working in. And so I definitely resonate with that idea. If you have to set your boundaries, and you have to be able to, you have to be able to as they say, know when to hold them and know when to fold them. Because if you don't, you can have the best whatever it is, but if you burn out, it's going to go to waste, because you're not going to be able to deliver it to anybody, and that's key. Now, I think about, when I think about social action, it covers such a broad topic or a broad area, right? It could be anything from helping to register people to vote, all the way to being on the front line of a protest where it might get fiery. And so in terms of what we're doing at the conference is trying to create this or remind people. I think it's better, because one of the programs of New Thought, or one of the ideas of New Thought, is that, as you were just indicating, this stuff has to be a way of life, not something that you just put on like you got a suit and you're going to church, right? It has to be an integral part of who you are and what you do every day, and that it is evolving because we're evolving.
Yeah.
And so, how do you instruct people in that kind of a way to do that, and not like one book or one class, as you were saying, which, like the magic pill?
Absolutely. So first I want to just take a step back and sort of, when we talk about social action, I want to reframe it in a broader way, so that we can understand that even if you're not on the front lines, right? Even if you're not serving in a position of what you might consider to be leadership, you're still doing the good work, right? And so when I define change makers or mission driven folks that are out there doing the good work, if you are doing something with the intention of improving life for people, animals, or the environment, you're doing the good work, right? And so whether that means that you're the person that's processing the payroll, you're the janitor that's cleaning up after the service or after the protest, right? You're the person that's doing the logistics to make sure that the meeting or the space is happening for this conference that's coming up. That is part of the doing the good work. And so often we think that if we're not on the front lines, if we're not forward facing, if your name is not in bold print on the program or on the marquee, that your contribution is not as important or valuable. And I think it's important for us to recognize that wherever we are, however we fit in, however we're showing up and serving, that our contribution is valuable and needed. And so I want to appreciate all the folks in all the ways that they serve in that way. Now, to the point of your question about how do we make this an ongoing practice, I think that's sort of what I heard you getting at. One of the ways that I practically break this down for folks is you want to have a process where you're ritualizing checking in with yourself, right, on a regular basis. And I like to do this on an annual basis, and then throughout the year, at least every 90 days or so, where you're sitting down and you're asking yourself, you know what is my highest intention for this season in my life and work? How am I being called to serve in this season? Okay, what are the top 1 or 2 priorities that I need to prioritize in this season in order to move this particular intention forward, or this way that I'm being called to serve forward? What are the things I need to say yes to in this season in order to make this possible? What do I need to say no to in this season to make this possible? So having a process and having a reflection ritual. And I do this on a annual basis. I do a free masterclass at the end of the year where I help people with this. I have a planning tool that I have that for folks that align with that, can be a tool that they use. But I invite people, whatever tool or whatever process, whatever community that you're a part of, one of the first places to start is to have a regular process where you're checking in with yourself and really just sort of asking yourself, again, what's my highest intention? How am I being called to serve? Am I on track? Has that changed? And what are the priorities that really align with helping me to move that forward? That's really sort of the starting point. I think what happens for many of us when we get off track is we start in a good place, but then we go on autopilot. And we end up experiencing something that I call IDD, or intention deficit disorder, right? So that's where we're moving on autopilot, and we are busy moving through our days. We wake up first thing in the morning, you're responding to text messages and emails, you're trying to help other people, and you roll out of bed into a day filled with all those things, right?
Yes.
And you can reach a point where, you lay down at night and you may be exhausted, you may be tired, you may be able to check off that you did this and you did that. But how many of those things were actually truly aligned with moving forward the intention for your life in this particular season? So critically important to have that process, whatever that looks like for you. You can play around with that. But as a practical step, asking yourself, when am I going to be checking in periodically with my intention and what my priorities are for this particular season?
Yeah, no, that's key, and you bring 2 things to mind. I guess the first thing is Stephen Covey, who had his 7 habits or 12 habits, and the first one was put first things first, right? You got to know where you're headed, right? And then the other thing that came to me as you were stating the different modalities that we have to work out of. You said you work with nonprofit organizations, and I've worked with nonprofit organizations, and I'm currently a board of trustee at a theological university. And occasionally we do the SWOT analysis, right?
Yes.
Where we say, what are your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? And I've recently been experimenting with, why don't we do that for our personal life as well, to begin to see, and you made me think about it right in line with what you were talking about. I come up with my plan, and I don't take any inventory of, okay, what do I have right now to help me complete this, and what am I missing? And then what opportunities there, and how do I begin to craft this? And I appreciate that approach, and just to step back, that whole point that you were making about everyone from the payroll person to the platform speaker. You know, in our tradition, we speak of this whole idea of diversity and integration. And and for me, one of the best teachers of that idea is a rainforest, right? Because it is very diverse, everything from mushrooms to gigantic trees, but everything has a symbiotic relationship. They work together, they feed each other, they heal each other. And when we're doing this work, there are no big I's and little U's, as they say. It is us, it is a team. And I love that's incorporated in your program, because it's very much needed. It's not, forget needed, it's required if you're going to do this work, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So with that in mind, how would you begin to instruct the conference goers about that integral relationship to staying healthy and to staying effective in this work?
So one of the ways that I frame this is that, going back to what I was talking about earlier with the outer work and the inner work, sometimes we use language like work-life balance, right? And I use that because it's a common phrase that we all are familiar with, and we have some sense of what we mean when we say that, right? But it can be a bit confusing depending on what your intention is when you use that word, right? Because in one way you could use it, you could be implying that your work or your inner work and the outer work are separate things, right? But they're really integrated. They're together. And so the first place I start is really with the reframing, to understand that the inner work is the work. It's not separate and apart from the outer work, or from what you do day to day or professionally, and what you do day to day in your spiritual community. And if you want to do your work in a sustainable way, if you want to fulfill the intention for your life in this season in a sustainable way, you need to fuel yourself to do that. The fuel for that outer work in a sustainable way over the long term is the inner work, right? So what do we mean when we talk about inner work, right? So I break this down into essentially 4 different basics. We're talking about mindset, and under mindset, we can include spiritual community, spiritual practice, and there are lots of modalities that we could talk about in terms of having a sharp mindset, right? Or your mental, or in other words, your broader mental, emotional, spiritual well-being. Second, energy, right? How are you fueling yourself? What are you consuming in terms of food, in terms of media? Is it feeding you? Is it nourishing you? What is that looking like? You know, diet and nutrition. What is that looking like? What are you putting in your body? And then sleep, right? So when you bring all those together, those are sort of the foundational pieces of the inner work. And so the second thing that I would share to answer your question is that sometimes we think what I just shared is too simple. And so we spend a lifetime chasing after, well, it can't be that simple. Let me just go to this next seminar. Let me buy this. Let me buy this other self-help book, right? Let me go to this other conference because this person said this, and it can't be that simple. Like, it has to be a bit more complicated than that. Because if it were that simple, then I would have done it by now. I would have figured it out, right? And so we spend a lifetime sort of seeking when we already have what we need sort of right in front of us. So the 2 things I would just sort of really, to summarize my response to what you just shared, is number 1, reframe. The inner work is the work. And then number 2, don't make it complicated. Keep it simple.
Yeah, that statement of keep it simple, that always comes up, it seems. I don't know why that pops up, you know, because like you said, and I think that's a great framing, if you will, in that, you know, we often look at others' lives who we consider to be successful, however that appears, and it's something that we want to emulate. And we figure out, well, I can't do that, first of all, because it's got to be hard, because look how successful. And we go down this path that makes it even slipperier, I mean, it's enough work to be done without you adding obstacles to the path. And so the one thing that I find common in across the board in successful people is they have a community. And you know, we're going to be at the conference with a community of new thought practitioners across the African diaspora. And you know, one of the outcomes is to create this broader community of African American descendants from a new thought perspective. How, you know, and given our tradition of community and how some of these things are not always adhered to in terms of diet and things like that, what kind of advice would you give on that, or how would you frame that to our community?
Well, I mean, I think if folks are struggling with where to start, maybe they start and stop, maybe they tried other things and it hasn't worked out. I'm always a big fan, again, keeping it simple and asking, you know, just a simple question such as, well, what's in my power to control right now where I'm at? I know the things that aren't working or haven't worked, but what's in my power to control right now? What resources do I have to support me in getting where I want to go? And I'll give you one final reflection question to consider here, which is, what's one thing that I can do in the next 7 days to make progress on whatever this issue or whatever this challenge is, right? In the workplace context, one of the examples that I share is, you know, maybe that means you contact HR and you ask them about your health benefits plan. Like, does it cover gym membership? Or maybe you need therapy, right? And so you want to find out what kind of coverage you have for mental health, for example. In the context of a spiritual community, that might mean actually calling your community, right? Calling your church office and say, hey, like, this is the issue I'm having. Do we have anyone in our community that works with people on this issue? Do we have a class? Do we have a resource that's available? Or can someone simply just pray with me about this particular issue or challenge that I have? That taking that one small step then creates a domino effect for you to begin to have more action in your life. But sometimes we get overwhelmed and we trip ourselves up and we fall short, not because our intentions aren't good, but because maybe we're doing too much at one time, because we've been conditioned to think, well, if it's not complicated, if we're not biting off this much at a time, then like we're not making progress. When, you know, what if you just took it 5, 10, 15 minutes at a time and asked yourself, going back to that last question I asked you, you know, 15 minutes over the next 7 days, what can I do to make progress on this? I think you can make a phone call, you can send an email, you can talk to your HR person or the person at your spiritual community and just simply collect some information. I think that's probably doable for most people as a starting point.
Yeah, and I like that starting point, because what it highlights your previous statement of keep it simple. That's a simple phone call. That's a simple question that you can begin to get information, help alleviate any stress that you might have if you're looking for something and you don't know where to look for it. So that's perfect. And I like that because I've found over my travels that, and I'll just speak for myself, you know, sometimes as they told us from elementary, that no question is a stupid question. And I sit and suffer with something because I don't take that first simple step of asking the question until I'm beat down and run over and just can't do anything else. And then I call somebody, or they call me and they notice something that you said earlier in my energy, and they say, man, what's wrong with you? Well, they say, man, why didn't you call me? Why didn't you ask me that question? So that's a great point. And I love that starting point. And I think given the technology onslaught that we have now, with, you know, unless you turn your phone off and your computer off, somebody can touch you 24 hours every day. And so how would you, but if you're on the front line, so to speak, you may
Sure.
need access. How do you speak to that issue of balancing that, or how do we begin to incorporate that kind of access and everything in our life now?
Absolutely. So I think a good place to start is simply acknowledging that the technology that we have access to
Mhm.
can be an asset for us if we allow it to, and that we get to make a conscious decision about how we're interacting with it, right? We get to
Mhm.
ask questions like, is this particular use of my technology adding value to my life, or is it taking value away from my life? Um, and so to dive a little bit deeper in this, I want to connect it to something I shared with you earlier. You asked me about where do people start on this journey to making self-care a practice. And I talked
Mhm.
about periodically checking in with what's my highest intention for this season in my life, right?
Right.
When it comes to technology, a follow-up question that you can ask is, how is my technology supporting me in moving this intention forward, right?
Yeah.
And when you're able to reflect on that, then that is able to give you maybe some parameters, some boundaries that you can
Mhm.
set around how you use your technology in service of whatever your highest intention is for that. A practical way that you can do this in the workplace is something that I call the rules of engagement. So you gave the
Mhm.
example of someone that's on the front line, and maybe they need to be readily available and be able to respond quickly in some instances, right? But the reality is that we're not robots, and so you need time to rest and recharge. And so it's we already know that's impossible for you to, even if you wanted to do that 24/7.
Right.
And
Right.
so recognizing that, recognizing your intention, recognize the power you have in terms of how you're using your technology, you can begin to have a conversation with the people that you're serving, the people that are on your team, to talk about, well, what are our core hours? When are we expecting people to actually show up and to be available? What
Mhm.
are our expectations in terms of how quickly someone should respond based on whether something is urgent or whether something is not urgent, right? Um, does the quickness of the response change if I send you an email versus if I send you a text message, or if I leave you a voicemail, right? We can begin to have those conversations, create a shared understanding so that we
Mhm.
understand. For me, for example, I tell my clients that I'm engaged with for long-term engagements, um, if you send me an email, I'm going to assume that it's not urgent, and I'll get back to you within 24 to 48 hours. However, if it is urgent, I give you permission to text me or to call and leave a voicemail, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Um, I could probably count on maybe one hand the number of times I've actually had someone who needed to reach me urgently about something that we were working on. And in
Right.
part because we've been able to set these parameters ahead of time and establish availability, and people are able to, for the most part, work within those windows, right? And when they're not,
Right.
they have that explicit permission that I've already given them about how to reach me. And what that
Mhm.
allows you to do is, um, if you're a person that is concerned or anxious about taking time away, spending time with the family, you know, making time for that inner work, going to the gym, praying, meditating, whatever it is that you do for yourself, that helps to lower some of that anxiety level, because okay, well,
Right.
yes, it's possible that I might need to be reachable, but I've given people parameters that we've agreed upon about how to reach me if that is truly an emergency, if something is truly urgent and important that I need to attend to right away.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I like that. And, I work in the IT world, and one thing we have is a SLA, or service level agreement. And what I
Yes,
just heard you describe is an SLA, uh,
yes,
in many different modalities of when I will be available for service, and what my agreement is with you in terms of when I'll get back to you, how I'll get back to you, and escalation and that whole thing. And so
absolutely.
I want to come back to that a little bit. But
Sure.
before we do that, I wanna just kick in a quick advertisement, if you will, for the conference that's fast approaching. I can't even believe it's less than 3 weeks away almost now. And so let's do that, and we'll be right back.
Time waits for no one. It's true. Regular registration for Celebrating Our Soul has closed. Fear not. Late registration is available. While there are limited seats, there is room for you if you register now. Go to padntg.com and register, and you will experience phenomenal live music, unique masterclasses, scrumptious food, and loving fellowship. Don't delay. Do it today. Go to padntg.com and join us at Celebrating Our Soul, consciously creating change. See you there.
Okay, everyone, we're back with Meico Whitlock here, that's been sharing some nuggets. I hope you had your pencil and paper available as we do this to pick up some of the nuggets he's been dropping. And if you haven't registered for the conference, please do so if you can. And if you can't, as we just indicated, there's a virtual option that's available. Get in touch, find out how you can be a part of this continuing, evolving history of practitioners, leaders, master teachers of African descent to help guide and shepherd and refuel and advocate for us to help each other. I think that's a admirable thing for us to do, and it speaks to the heart of what community is. The heart of what community is. And so before we left, we talked about a little bit about this service level agreement, this SLA. How do you see that? Give us a little more, because you were doing it before, but give us a little more on how you see that might be applicable to us in the social justice, social action field.
And yes, so part of that requires us around to get good at setting boundaries and to understand, when we understand what our intention is for a particular season in life or work, how do we honor that with our yes and our no, right? So sometimes we do this work, and particularly for those of us that are mission driven, we believe that our yes is unlimited. And so we just say yes to everything, right? We think it's infinite. But the reality is that you have a finite number of yeses. And one of my favorite quotes is from a musical artist. Her name is Toni Jones. And she has a lyric in one of her songs where she says that if you only had, 20 yeses over your lifetime, who and what would get your yes? And so if we started to think about our yes tied to our time in that way, what would we actually be saying yes to? Right. And what would we actually be saying no to? Right. So if you had 20 yeses over the course of your lifetime, who and what would actually get your yes?
Wow.
So why do we say yes to things even when we know we should probably say no? Part of it is fear, right? We fear disappointing people, right? We want to be seen as the team player. We want to be seen as being available and being a good person. We may genuinely have a skill or a resource that could be helpful for whatever the ask is. But the reality is that we only have so many days, so many hours, so many minutes, right? And those run out at some point. And we have to be intentional about how we invest those. So being intentional with our yes and our no, part of it is also getting comfortable with disappointment.
Right.
And the way that I frame it is fear and disappointment, those are natural parts of our human experience. And when we are able to embrace that, we're able to understand that no matter what you do, even if you do it perfectly, someone's going to be disappointed with what you did or how you did it.
Right.
And I give the example when I do trainings with groups that you could cure cancer, and someone would complain that, yeah, you cure cancer, but you didn't cure this other thing, right?
Right.
So there's always going to be that disappointment. And to when you recognize that, and you sort of get more comfortable with understanding that, and working with the mindset piece around the mental and emotional aspects of how you feel in your body, your mind, your soul, when you have to say no, when you have to disappoint someone, and to understand that it's not something that you need to carry, right? It's something that you can release, particularly if you know that it's aligned with your intention. And there are ways that you can say yes and you can say no in ways that are kind. I'm not saying you that you're unkind with people, right? I'm not saying that you're short or disrespectful with people. There are
Right.
ways that you can honor yourself, and you can also communicate that in a way that is kind as well. So I work with that with people in the trainings that I do about, first, how do we work with the mindset piece around saying no and disappointing people? And how do we work with when we do say yes, not making it an open-ended yes,
Right.
right?
Right.
There's a difference between, yes, I'm able to volunteer for this event, and yes, I'm able to volunteer, but I'm only available on Saturday from 2 to 6.
Right.
I have another engagement that I need to get to after 6. So I'm only available, as opposed to saying, oh, yes, I'm available. You let me know what you need. It's like, well, that's not helpful for you, and that's not helpful for the person that's planning the event,
Right.
right?
Right.
Or asking for volunteers, right? Because the truth is, you can't be available and do it all 24/7, right? You
Yeah.
have to
Yeah.
represent yourself, right? And you want to honor the other person and give them an opportunity to fill in the gaps where you might not be able to fill in, right? And you can be aware of that and be proactive about that. The better it is for everyone, as opposed to what genuinely sometimes happen for many of us, is that we bite off more than we can chew, and we realize it at a point where it's too late to almost fix it, and the disappointment is compounded by the fact that not only have we not been able to live up to our commitment, but now it's had a ripple effect.
Right. 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 And that's I like that exclamation point, because as we said earlier, life is a whole thing. It's not this little thing that's divided in
Mm-hmm.
parts. And so when we don't fully care for the parts, they begin to slip over. My heart may be fine now, but if I don't take care of the physical piece, as you said earlier, sooner or later my heart is going to be affected by the work or lack thereof on that piece. And so that is key point, and a reminder, which is one of the cornerstones of New Thought teaching, is a holistic approach to things. Yes, there are parts. We do have to take care of the parts. But I heard once, you can take a bike and know every aspect of the bike, the spokes, the chain, the handlebars, but it doesn't become a bike until you put it all together. Other than that, it's just pieces. And I like that approach when we begin to look at this work in our community, that it's a wholeness that we really seek, and that we have to begin to incorporate in everything we do.
Absolutely.
And that brings up a point. In that, what do you think in this self-care piece? What do you think of some of the common misconceptions? I know you mentioned the big one right up front about keeping it simple, but what do you think of some misconceptions that we have about this work and taking care of ourselves and the like?
I think for many folks that I've worked with, that we accept that there is a certain level of pain or self-sacrifice that's required in order to do good work. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't trade-offs in life, right? Our time is finite, so we can't do all the things that we might want to do in a lifetime, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that in the process of doing the things that we want to make time for, that we have to sacrifice ourselves in order and burn ourselves out in order to make that happen, right? That there's, Deepak Chopra talks about in the 7 Spiritual Laws of Success, this idea of effortless ease, right? That we get to make a choice, right? We can hustle and grind our way through life, through work, through our spiritual, service, whatever that looks like, right? But there's an alternative path where we get to partner with the universe, and we get to get clear about intention, and we get to ask for what we need in order to fulfill that intention, and we get to work through whatever mental, emotional, and physical challenges we might be experiencing as we grow and approach our life in that way. So just to really go back and round out this point, one of the biggest ones is, again, that we have to sacrifice ourselves on the altar of our work in order for it to be meaningful, in order to be impactful. And in some communities, it's seen sort of as a badge of honor, right? We celebrate in some places. Oh, this person has worked for 20 years straight and never took a sick day, right? Or this person, is really a trooper, and they really came through for us. They had the flu and they still came and did X, Y, and Z. From my perspective, that is not necessarily something to celebrate, right? When we have healthy cultures inside of organizations and communities, we make room for people to take care of themselves. And part of that means that we're not just doing the individual work and taking care of ourselves, but we have to hold our organizations responsible for doing that work as well. It's not just an individual responsibility. It's also the responsibility of the organizations that we're serving to be able to support that as well. And at an organizational level, that might mean, we're going to do fewer programs this year, right? Maybe we're going to turn down this grant opportunity, right? Because we recognize that if we take this on, then this is going to require us to have our staff work 60 plus hours a week for a particular season, right? We get to proactively make those decisions. We get to proactively make those trade-offs. And I think many of us fear making those decisions. Some of us don't know that it's an option because perhaps we haven't seen it modeled, right? And I think what's required to help us get there is going back to this word intention I've been talking about, is making space for that. I talked about it in the individual context, but we need to be doing that at the organizational level too, right? So when we do our strategic planning for our boards and for our teams and our organizations, we strategically plan the outer work, but what's your plan for well-being and sustainability of your people as you're planning all this stuff that you're all going to be doing over the next year, over the next 5 years? What's the plan for pouring into your people so that they can pour into this plan in a sustainable way?
Yeah, and that's an amazing thing there, that piece, because I can remember just 10 years ago, if you went into almost any major corporation in the country, things like meditation and those types of conversations were not being had in the boardroom. But now they are, and corporations and nonprofits are offering these as part of their insurance packages, which shows you the value of doing that, right? Because we know from the corporate perspective, it's about maximizing the economy, right? And so they understand that there's a value to having a well-balanced, well-rested, centered individual. And we have to begin to follow that lead if we're not there already, of that, yes, this is important. And it's something that we value, and we will give you the time and pay you money in some cases to make it happen, because without it, you're not going to be effective. And I think
absolutely
working in our communities and addressing some of the things that we're faced with, there's no greater work than that. No greater work than that.
And it's a win-win.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Tell us more about that. Tell us more about that win-win, because most people don't see it life as win-win.
So as from an organizational perspective, part of the pushback is sometimes, well, we don't have the time and money to do that.
Mm-hmm.
We have this
Mm-hmm.
particular priority that we really need to move forward. But sometimes you have to move a little bit slower in order to move faster, right? So what if instead of your team resenting having to work in a certain way that is running them ragged, um, they're burned out, they're not giving their all, right? And you're experiencing maybe short-term success, but you're likely to experience high turnover, right?
Right.
And you're likely to have to rehire and fill positions. And there's some estimates that talk about, just in terms of financial costs, if you take the salary for a particular position, for some organizations, it can cost 2 to 3 times that salary to replace somebody. And that
Right.
doesn't factor in the amount of time that's lost trying to fill the gap for that role in the
Yep.
meantime, the
Yep.
onboarding, et cetera,
Yep.
right? So that's a
Yep.
very real intangible cost. Whereas what if we were to invest proactively in giving people the space to maybe take a little bit of time for themselves, investing in personal professional development, like what you're talking about with the meditation, or maybe it's just someone who just wants or needs Friday afternoons off to pick their kid up early from school, like whatever those things
Mm-hmm.
are.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
with a lot of teams that I work with, what folks are asking for on the mission driven side don't cost folks a whole lot of money. It doesn't
Right.
cost to give
Right.
people the flexibility to maybe end their day a little bit early, especially if you're doing hybrid work. It doesn't cost you a whole lot to have a formal program of acknowledgement and recognition inside your organization, recognizing that people are making a sacrifice, right? Thanking people for their contributions, right? Formally acknowledging that and showing some type of way of highlighting that as a
Mm-hmm.
team across the organization. Those small things done in a consistent way create a culture where people feel like they're valued, and
Right.
people in those situations are more likely to go above and beyond to serve the mission. And over the longer term, that actually, even just using the example I talked about in terms of turnover, uh, if we're talking about just purely financial numbers, that saves lots of organizations from having to go down that path.
Right. Right. That, I like that, and that leads to this last question, in terms of, what do you think are some effective strategies or some effective ways to engage our communities into more easily accepting these kinds of ideas and integrating them into wherever they can? As you said, you got to start where you are. But what do you think are some of the best ways to help engage our community in this?
I think the first place to start is we as the folks that are perhaps leading in our communities in formal roles, we have to embody what we're trying to see in our communities. And I think that means that's going to require for some of us to go on our own individual um,
Mm-hmm.
paths to doing
Mm-hmm.
that, and figuring out what does that look like for you individually.
Mm-hmm.
And for leaders in spiritual communities in particular, as you go on this journey, uh, the second part of this is, I think, thinking about ways that you can do this as a community, right? So, what are the ways that we can, not just as individual leaders in our communities, take care of ourselves, but how can we then make space for our communities to do the same?
Right.
And maybe a starting point is maybe having a class. I know that there's a SAE class that is offered through Unity that some communities are offering on a somewhat regular basis, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Maybe that is a starting place. Um, Maybe it's having a formal uh, sabbatical policy in place for senior
Mm-hmm.
leaders in your organizations.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Maybe that is taking a look at the conditions that require us to have a sabbatical policy. Why aren't people regularly taking time for themselves, right? Maybe just starting that conversation, maybe asking those questions at the beginning to start the conversation. You don't have to figure this out right now overnight. This is an ongoing conversation. And it's sort of like if anyone's ever done double Dutch, you just got to figure out where you're going to jump in.
Right.
Figure out where you're going to jump in, and wherever you jump in, it's going to be fine. Right. And that can be your starting point. Don't overthink it. Find a comfortable starting point for you and build from there. Yeah,
no, I love that. As one might say with double Dutch, I love the rhythm of that. You got to find and get in there.
Absolutely.
So, it's been such a pleasure chatting with you and getting to know you better. And I look forward to meeting you in person in the Unity Village. And I guess is there anything that we haven't touched that you would like to leave the audience with, or that you would like to make sure that you get that point there, so we can do this work and learn from your wisdom and teachings?
Absolutely. So I want to share that, unfortunately, I won't be in person. So my session is a hybrid session. I'm going to be presenting remotely. And so what that means is that even if you aren't at Unity Village, you get an opportunity to participate in this session. And so if I could leave folks with anything to encourage folks to sign up for the virtual option, if you're not able to be there in person, that's going to be making it more accessible and more affordable for people that want to participate in that way. And for folks that want to stay in contact, they can go to our website and sign up for the email list if they are interested. So that's mindfultechie.com. So mindfultechie.com. So folks that want to stay in touch. And I'll round it out by just saying I believe that everything we do really is grounded in what is our highest intention for our life in a particular season. So I would encourage folks, if you take nothing else from this conversation, just to take some time to ask yourself, ask Spirit, what's my highest intention for this season? What should I be focused on? And then you can build from there. Wow.
Well, Brother Whitlock, thank you so much for this time. And I will be tuning in to that session because as I said, I work with some boards myself, and everything you've said I could use. So I want to go and get a little bit more of that. And ladies and gentlemen, sign up, however you can, and take this info, because we all need to be replenished and nourished. And Brother Meico seems like he got a good handle on that thing, and I want to make sure that we take advantage of it. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, and look forward to seeing you in person or virtual at the conference of Celebrating Our Soul. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
This fantastic interview was just an example of the depth and content of those presenting at Celebrating Our Soul, Consciously Creating Change. Go to padntg.com to register. Be there for it.